Hello and welcome back to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'm going to be sharing with you a requested video of how to draft a conical corset pattern. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Let's dive right into today's video. So I've gone ahead to mark out all my basic measurements, which includes my shoulder to bust, shoulder to underbust, and shoulder to waistline. So for my top length, I'm using 22 inches. And the difference between my back and my front is 1.5 inches because I'm making use of a bust dart for this. So after that, I'll just go ahead to mark my neckline, which I'm using the standard neckline of 3 by 3 inches, and I'll go ahead to mark. So after marking my basic neckline of 3 by 3 inches, I'm just going to go ahead, place my French cuff, and I'm going to go ahead to mark it out all the way. So after connecting my neckline, the next step is to go ahead to mark my shoulder. But before that, I'm going to go ahead to outline the neckline of my pattern. Now my shoulder is 14 inches, divided by 2 I have 7 inches, adding half because this pattern has a sleeve that is 7.5. I'll go down by 1 inch and I'm going to connect it back to the neckline of the dress. So after that, I'm going to use my marker to outline it to make it more visible. Now I'm going to mark the chest line, which is my bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. I'll make a mark at that point and I'll measure what I have and mark all the way through just to get a straight line at this point. So I'll go ahead and outline it to make it more visible. So whatever I have at the shoulder point, which is 7.5 inches, I'll mark it here. Now I'm going to draw a straight line connecting from my shoulder point down to my chest line. So after now, I'm going to go ahead to outline it to make it more visible, and the next step is to divide what I have at this point into 2. So placing my tape, I'm going to fold it up this way, mark at this point, and I'll be coming in by ½ inch just to draw my armhole curve. And next, I'll be marking my bust circumference divided by 4 to serve as a guide. Now I'll place my French cuff touching my bust circumference, the ½ inch, and down to my shoulder point, and I'm going to go ahead to outline it to make it more visible. After doing this, the next step you want to take is to go ahead and mark your nipple to nipple divided by 2. Now my nipple to nipple is 7 inches, divided by 2 I have 3.5 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to mark it at the bust points, at the chest line, under bust, waist, and top length. So after marking that, the next step is to go ahead to connect a straight line at this point. So here I have a straight line, and I'm going to go ahead to divide what I have at the shoulder. From that point, I'm going to go ahead to connect it down to my chest line this way, which will serve as a guide when I'm drawing out my dart at the upper part. Now I'm going to go ahead to outline all my pattern so that it's going to be visible. So after doing this, the next step you want to take is to mark your dart intake. I'll be marking 1 inch at both sides of my underbust waistline, and I'm going to connect it back. So for a plus size, you can go ahead and use 1.5 inches dart, and I'm just going to draw this out, and after that I'll blend it down to the lower part. So after blending it down, I'm going to use my marker to draw it out so that it's going to be visible for you to see. So after drawing this out, the next step you want to take is to draw out your cup, and I'll place my French cuff, connect from my bust down to the under bust. You can go ahead and make use of your bust radius also if you want to use that method. Now I'll also connect, and this is what I have. Go ahead to outline it so that it's going to be more visible. So after outlining this, the next step you want to take is to go ahead to determine how high or low you want your cup to be. So I'll be using 1.5 inches. You can make use of 2 inches or more if you want your bust to be covered and you don't want to reveal much cleavage. Now I'm going to go ahead to mark my dart intake of 1 inch at both sides. So for a plus size, you can go ahead to use 1.5 or more at this point, and then I'm going to go ahead to connect.
So
after connecting it, I'm going to go ahead to use my marker to mark it out so that it will be visible also for you to see. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead to mark my body circumference. I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, which gives me 8.3. Now you're going to measure this dart intake. You can go ahead and mark this 2 inches dart intake, or mark what you have exactly at your chest line, because this pattern does not really make use of much allowance. So now I'll be marking 2 inches allowance for my sewing allowance, but I'll be taking that out later when I'll be joining the body, connecting the pattern together. So at the under bust, I'll mark my under bust circumference divided by 4, mark the dart intake, and I'll still go ahead to mark these 2 inches. So now I'm adding this sewing allowance because of people that will ask me for sewing allowance, but for this pattern you're not going to make use of too much sewing allowance. So I'll mark my waist circumference, measure the dart intake, and add the sewing allowance. So when I'm connecting my pattern or drafting it out finally, I'm going to be just adding ½ inch, and I will remove the rest of the sewing allowance. Now on the hip, I'm going to mark the hip circumference divided by 4, and there's no dart intake at the lower part, and I'm just going to mark. So now what I'm going to do is to go ahead to mark my sewing allowance here, which will be removing much later. So now the next step is just to go ahead and I will connect this pattern from the chest line to the bust, to the under bust, to the waist, and down to the top length. So now I'll place my French curve and connect down to the hip line. But after this, I'm going to be altering the hip line of this pattern. This is where the conical corset comes in. It's a type of corset that gives you a hip illusion, that makes your hip look wider. So after that, now from my under bust, I'll be going up by 1.5 inches. So now this is the difference from my back and my front measurements. So everybody's own is different. I don't have much bust, that's why my own is 1.5 inches. So yours can be 2 inches, 2.5 or more. So after cutting out, I'm going to go ahead to blend in my darts. You're going to go ahead to fold it up, touching the bust line to close up the bust dart at this point. Now you're going to go ahead to tape it so that it's going to stay together, and now you're going to blend in from your chest line to your bust point and down to your under bust at the side. So now from the chest line, you're going to come in by ½ inch, and you're going to place your French curve to connect and draw. So when I was marking out that part, I didn't know that my camera actually cut that part off, but I'm going to explain what I did on that point later. So go ahead and outline it this way, connecting to that ½ inch you came in at the chest line. So after that, I'm going to place my French curve, connect from that upper part down to the ½ inch at the chest line. So now you can go ahead to see what I marked out, and after this I'm just going to blend it out because you want your cup to meet at the other side also when you're connecting. So I'll go ahead to connect it to the armhole this way. So now to draw out my cup on this part, I'm going to go ahead to divide what I have between my armhole and my bust circumference, fold my tape, place my French curve, and I'm going to go ahead to connect this way. So this is what I have at this point. So now we want to go ahead and snatch our waistline. So with that, we'll be creating another dart intake. So I'll divide what I have here into 2, and I'm going to be drawing a line to connect. So I'm going to connect from my waist, and I'm going to go ahead to connect it upwards, and I'll also go ahead to connect it to the lower part. So now this is what I have, and on this part I'm going to slant it a little upwards so that when I cut out, it doesn't really cut close to my cup, but this is also okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I will slant it upwards this way. So now the next thing is to go ahead to mark our dart intake to snatch our waistline. So my waistline is 28 inches and we'll be snatching 3 inches from it. So what you're going to do is to minus 3 inches. So 28 minus 3, I have 25. Now you're going to divide my actual waistline, which is 28 divided by 4, I have 7 inches. So my snatched waistline, which is 25 divided by 4, I have 6.25. Now I'm going to do 7 minus 6.25, I have 0.75. So this 0.75, by the time I take it out on the front part by the left side and take it out on the right part, I will be having 1.5. So I'll repeat the same process for the back and it will give me a total of 3 inches. Now that 0.75, I'm going to divide it into 2. So I'm going to fold my tape this way and I'll be marking it at both sides of the line. So just like I said, mark it on this side and mark it on the other side. So that means we are dividing 0.75 into 2. So now I'll connect it upwards this way and connect it down to the 0.75 dots. Now I'm going to go ahead to connect it to the lower point. So this is what I have. After that, I'm just going to go ahead to mark out the dots to make it more visible. So now I'm going to go ahead to label my cup as A and B. So you can turn yours to a 3-part corset if you like also. All you have to do is just divide your cup into 3. So now we're going to be creating the hip illusion at the hip point. So now, just like I said, we are going to go ahead to reduce our sewing allowance. So now I'm going to go ahead to remark my hip circumference divided by 4, which leaves me at 10 inches. So now I'm going to go ahead to take out, to just mark only ½ inch. That is after my bust circumference, I marked ½ inch. After my waist circumference and the dart intake, I'll go ahead to add ½ inch, then connect it back. So you can see what I'm doing. And after doing that, at the waistline, I'm going to go ahead to mark the waist circumference. That is after the initial first waist circumference, I'm going to add ½ inch. And remember, we snatched our waist, so immediately the initial waist circumference we marked, I added ½ inch to that point. So if you have any question or if you're confused about any part, please leave your question at the comment section. So from my hip point, after my hip point, I'm going to be marking 3 inches. Now, this hip illusion, you can use more than 3 inches depending on what you want to create. But from what we have at the thumbnail, the one there is not too big. So now I'm going to place my French curve and connect from my hip down to the waistline. So with this, it will give you like a snatched effect at your waist and then give you a bigger hip at the hip points. So this is what I have, and I'll go ahead to outline it out. So at the lower part of this corset, you notice that there's like a little irregular shape at this point. So I'll be going up by 0.25 or 0.3 at the dart intakes, and I'll just be drawing out a little curve at that part. So this is what I have at the end, and the next step is just to go ahead to cut this out. So after that, I'm going to go ahead to shade out the dart intake I have, and after that, I'm going to be cutting out my pattern. So while cutting, when I get to the bust dart, I'm going to slit it this way to the center of the bust, and I'm going to go ahead to use my tape to hold it up. So after that, I'm just going to go ahead to cut my pattern. So if you have any question regarding to this tutorial, please leave your question at the comment section. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. So after cutting out, this is my final result, and we'll be moving to the back pattern. So next, we'll be moving over to the back pattern, and here I've marked out all the basic measurements. just like we did in front, shoulder to bust, shoulder to underbust, shoulder to waistline, and top length. Now the only difference is that my top length is 1.5 inch shorter than the front, and I went ahead to mark my nipple to nipple, and I placed my ruler and connected a straight line. Now I'll go down by 1 inch and I'm going to connect it all the way to my nipple to nipple. And after doing that, I'm just going to go ahead to outline it this way to make it more visible. So after this, the next step is to go ahead to mark 0.25 inches at the yoke. So with this, you'll be getting rid of the bulginess at the lower parts. Now after that, we'll be marking our dart intake. So at the waistline, I'm going to mark 1/2 inch. So on this pattern, you notice I did not mark the under bust. So you can go ahead and impute your under bust, or you can just go ahead to leave that. Now I'm going to connect from the upper part down to the waistline, and from that point I'll just slant it down to the top length. So I'll go ahead to outline this to make it more visible. So next step, so I'll go ahead to shade out the darts, and now I'll be inserting my body measurements. I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll go ahead to add my 1/2 inch for joining allowance. Over to the bust line, I'm going to go ahead to mark the bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll add 1/2 inch, which is my joining allowance, which is the same thing I did at the chest line. So now at the waistline, I'm going to go ahead to mark the waist circumference, measure the dart intake, and add 1/2 inch for joining allowance. So I'm going to connect all the way down to my waist. And now on the top length, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to connect. So to mark the hip illusion effect, I had to add another pattern paper to the lower part. So now I'm just going to measure my pattern. Now I'm going to be marking 3 inches, and I'll add 1/2 inch to it, making it 3.5. So remember, we used 3 inches at the lower part of the hip at the front part. So now I'm going to go ahead to connect. After connecting, I find out that it's looking a bit pointy, and I'm just going to blend it in by 1/2. So this doesn't really change anything on the corset. So next, I'm just going to go ahead to blend out my pattern, and this is what I have. So now we're going to snatch our waist at this point. Now I will divide what I have here and mark. So just like we did at the front, we're going to minus 3 inches from our initial waist that we want to snatch. My waist is 28, minus 3, I have 25. Now I'll be doing 28 divided by 4, I have 7, and 25 divided by 4, I have 6.25. So I'll be minusing, I'll do 7 minus 6.25, and I have 0.75. Now that's 0.75. That is what I'll be marking at this line. So I'm going to divide it into 2, and I'll mark at one side and I'll mark at the other side. So remember, you're dividing the 0.75 into 2. So after that, I'm just going to go ahead and connect and draw a dart. After connecting, I'll go ahead to connect it down to the lower part, which is the hip part or the top length, and I'll go ahead to outline my pattern so that it's going to be more visible. Now at the waistline, I'll come in by 1/2 inch. I want to take out the bulginess at the back of the dress, but you can go ahead and leave it straight. So I'll slant it down to the top length and slant it upwards. After that, I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to mark it out so that it's going to be more visible. So after doing this, now you want to go ahead to create a lacing bar for your dress, and now place your tape at this point, mark 1.5. So when you get to the waistline, you want to measure the 1.5 immediately after the 1/2 inch that you went in by, and the lower part, go ahead to mark 1.5 at the beginning of the pattern piece. So after that, just go ahead to make a mark to indicate your lacing bar. So now I'm just going to create that little effect we have at the front, go up by 0.25 or 0.3 and connect it all the way just this way. So after this, I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. If you have any question, please leave at the comment section. So we'll proceed to cutting out the pattern, and after cutting out the pattern, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, and see you in our next video. Thanks.